John Bertrand.
I met a guy the other day. He said that he was driving across Sydney Harbour Bridge. When we crossed the line, the traffic stopped, people got out and hugged. And I was talking to an airline captain the other day, he's retired, and he said they refused to take off from Sydney Airport until we crossed the line.
They're about to cross the line. They make a final move.
What now exists was once imagined.
I tell you what, any boss who sacks anyone for not turning up today is a bum.
Integrity, okay, it's not rocket science. It comes from honesty, no bull. For the America's Cup, Australia 2, we created our own brand. It was called the Boxing Kangaroo flag.
Yeah. Symbology.
Yeah.
But we're in the business of beating the bastards.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back to BRANDR. Rather special day because I've always wanted to say this, that our next guest needs no introduction. Welcome to BRANDR.
Thank you.
John Bertrand, legend of so many things. Question to kick off the discussion. If we think of Australia as a brand, so let's say the country as a brand, like many brands, they have their moments in the sun and then they have their, if you like, their down periods. You're quite unique in that you've lived through an experience and been there behind the scenes when Australia was front and centre on a number of occasions. And we'd really love you to share those, warts and all, because this is all about the backstory. What was going on in those major events when you were there, and which were they?
It's kind of interesting. Quite a few years ago, there was a survey done that the three most remembered events in modern Australian history: John F. Kennedy's assassination, Neil Armstrong on the moon, and Australia 2 crossing the finishing line to win the America's Cup. So
great story.
Yeah. So the America's Cup, and I was so incidentally that was my fourth America's Cup. So not as if it's you go in there and all of a sudden you can do this. So I was involved for 13 years trying to win it. This is in the 80s, of course, late 70s, 80s. I started off with Gretel 2. I was the youngest guy to ever sail an America's Cup boat with, and the chairman then was Sir Frank Packer, old man Packer, middleweight boxing champion of Australia during the Depression, tough old bastard. And then a man called Alan Bond, he was 34 years old, and he first challenged for the America's Cup in 1974, and I was assistant designer with Ben Lexcen. We got hammered by the Yanks each time. Then 1980 got hammered again, and then 83 we won. But the 83 thing, why was such a big deal? And still part of the country's sort of history, and I guess will be for a long time. From when you say brand. We're going through a tough recession at the time. We're talking about 1983, bushfires, floods. The country was on its, against all odds in many ways, and we came back, and we don't compete against the Americans unless it's the Olympic Games, really. And we came from 3-1 down, 3-2, 3-3, and then eventually won that race. They called it the race of the century. And it captivated the country's imagination. People, if they're old enough, still literally come up to me every day in the street to tell me what they were doing, not what I was doing when we crossed the line over 40 years ago.
Wow.
So it continues on.
Who was the Prime Minister at that time?
Yeah, Bob Hawke.
Bob Hawke.
It's
so
remarkable.
Era,
he's the man who said anyone who sacks anyone for being late today is a bum.
Yeah.
And
he was dressed in an interesting suit from memory.
Well, it came out of nowhere and it disappeared, that particular jacket. No one ever saw it again. There've been duplicates, which is in the National Sports Museum and so on. But Bob Hawke had the ability to capture the essence of the moment. And that wasn't pre-rehearsed. I know that for a fact. It just it came out of the man. And here's the Prime Minister of our country that went global. It's one of these things, that all of these elements came together, that Bob Hawke was the right man at the right time. He had the ability to communicate like very few leaders of a country can or have. We'd gone through all this really tough stuff. We came back from the dead, a little bit like Gallipoli, with our backs to the wall, although in this case we won. In Gallipoli it was a tragedy. It's part of, who we are in many ways. And then I was involved in 2 Olympics, 72, that was with the Israelis assassinated. It's terrible. Yeah, it was in Germany.
Yep.
And then 76 in Montreal, and then 80 we boycotted. Well, Australia, including the sailing, boycotted because Russia invaded Afghanistan, would you believe? Look back at it and you think, for goodness sake. But and then 2000, I had a company. I was chairman of a company called Hawke Sports, and in partnership with NBC in America, we broadcast NBCOlympic.com. We had 350 people at Homebush during those the Olympics, 2000 Olympics. And we broadcast online to the world. It was really the first major production like that. So groundbreaking stuff. And in hindsight, the 2000 Olympics was all part and parcel of Brand Australia in many ways. I guess you could say that.
What was the audience, or who was the audience back in 1983? And maybe just for the younger audience, what's the America's Cup all about? I mean, it has a history, and maybe not everybody listening or viewing would actually know how compelling that competition is.
Well, a lot of people wouldn't know what the America's Cup's all about. Sailing, it's a minor sport.
Yeah.
The America's Cup started off before the US Civil War, 1851.
Wow.
Yeah. Queen Victoria issued a challenge to the rest of the world when Britain ruled the waves. A boat called the America was built in a very small yacht club called the New York Yacht Club, because this is before, a long time ago for America as well. And they sailed across the Atlantic and beat the best of 19 British boats, came back, and the Americans successfully defended for 132 years until we, Australia, were able to be successful. A lot of nations, the Brits and the Irish and French, Italians are all challenged, but no one was ever successful at the period of time. So what makes it different? Well, it's the longest running sporting event in history, well beyond the Olympic Games or anything else. And it's one of these things where no one had ever won it. So it was it was the Everest of sport. And when Australia and our team, and I was the skipper of that boat, captain of the team, we won it. It was clearly a big deal back in Australia. So the audience was amazing. It was people, the concept of being sailing followers was not part of the relevance. I met a guy the other day. He said that he was driving across Sydney Harbour Bridge. When we crossed the line, the traffic stopped. People got out and hugged each other on the harbour bridge. And I was talking to an airline captain the other day. He's retired. And he said they refused to take off from Sydney Airport until we crossed the line. So you look back and you think, well, one, it was sport, but you know what it was? It was Australia taking on the world, and in particular, the most powerful nation in the world, the United States of America. And that was all part of this, in hindsight, the significance of it. And we're going through a tough recession. So the America's Cup continues. It's alive and well, but it's different now. And it's a little bit like, I guess 500 people climb Mount Everest every year, whereas, no one had ever done it until Hillary.
Yeah, you remember the first. Yeah,
one of the things.
That's right. Yeah,
one of the things I think that might be part of that magic that you created, the team and you created, was this the unknown in terms of the technology, the keel, this sense of mystery. And I think that captured the mind. It certainly captured my mind when I was listening to the show, the greatest race of the century. Was this design element? This, how could this small team from Australia use creativity, imagination, plus strength of fortitude to come back from defeat after defeat after defeat to actually win this race?
That's right. It's a deep, compelling story. Actually, taking on the US, the most technologically advanced. They had Boeing and Lockheed, McDonnell Douglas all involved in that. The '83 campaign.
Didn't Dennis Conner engage with the Navy, the American Navy, to help with the design of his boat, the Liberty?
For the Americans, a lot of technology behind that. Yeah. So the key, basically, the overview there, the vision, and you're going to have a vision, and you've got to have a vision, in my opinion, that's exciting for people. And the vision was, what's the game going to look like in 20 years' time? Let's get there faster than anyone else in the world. And that actually came from my experience with the Olympics, where I'd competed in already 2 Olympics, 72 and 76, and you could see for every 4 years, which is the Olympic time, throwing a javelin, 100-meter sprint, doesn't matter what, you get an improvement in performance. But the interesting thing about us as human beings is that, and the Olympics is the cutting edge of human endeavour from my perspective.
Yeah.
You're either a hero or a bum. There's nothing in between. You're either on the podium or nothing. And I was 4th at 72, got a bronze medal. East Germany and Russia was 1st and 2nd in 76, but I got on that bloody podium, right? The difference is enormous.
Yeah.
And anyway, you take any four-year period of the Olympic movement, you have an improvement in performance. The interesting thing is any 20-year period of the Olympic movement over the last 160 years of competition, and you have a quantum leap in performance. So it's not rocket science to say podcasting, the way this thing is being put together now, these guys behind the cameras and so on. What's the game going to look like in 20 years' time compared to now? All we do know is that it'll be much further progressed than what it is as of today. So the vision of that project was very simple. What's the game going to look like in 20 years' time? And we had no idea, of course, but it allowed people gave them the authority to take their blinkers off, to start thinking outside the box. And this guy called Ben Lexcen, who was our designer, the wing keel, the whole thing.
Yeah.
The stories are amazing within it. He went to school at 9 and left at 12. So he had 3 years of formal education. Now, you boys, you have more than 3 years of formal education, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. And I have a double degree. I graduated with a Master of Science at MIT in Boston, and, most advanced engineering science school in the world. And coming across and meeting with Benny, 3 years of formal education, he was never told to think inside a box. And I tell you, he was the Leonardo da Vinci of this country. He was the most interesting and interested person I've ever met. And he would listen with 2 ears, and he was absorbed. He was an incredible raconteur. He processed ideas, and he never was constrained. And I think our Western education system, we're told to think inside a box. I remember at MIT, when I was going through, I remember the professor of advanced mathematics that I was involved with, he said, John, unless you can put a problem into numbers, you'll never solve it. Well, the fact is the power of intuition takes us much further beyond that, when we know so little about intuition compared to, the normal education, Western, education system. So Benny was, when we talked about 20 years out, over the horizon, we call it, over the horizon thinking, like the Ed de Bono, lateral thinking, right? Benny just encapsulated, that's who he was.
So he was the essential backroom.
Fundamental,
Clark.
No question.
And also an energy force, because he was out of the box. And so therefore you couldn't actually measure exactly what he would do next, because he saw things in a different way. I mean, William Blake, 17th century.
Who's William Blake?
William Blake is a poet of the 17th century who said, what now exists was once imagined. And that is the power of imagination and intuition, as you said. And so he saw things that were not necessarily, he revealed things that were not necessarily known to everyone else, because he thought in a different way.
Ben was a nightmare to work with. Right. Absolutely.
Like most geniuses.
Absolutely nightmare, because there's no process or formal or whatever. So me coming from a formal background, it took me quite a while to be able to work with him. But he was fantastic. He became the godfather of our first child, Beautiful man.
So, John, with the story related with America's Cup, obviously technology had a role to play, but so did the people. So we often talk on this podcast about step one of the brand is building a culture, a shared sort of idea.
Building a what?
A shared culture.
Right.
If you've got a great brand logo and all the rest, that's incidental. If you don't have a culture. So maybe you can just talk for a sec about the blend of technology and culture at the time. Because I know you're very, very strong on culture. Without the tech, would you have had the culture, and vice versa?
Yeah, well, the project was built on a vision
Yep.
and culture.
Yep.
So what does culture really mean? Like, it's a kind of a strange word people talk about different ways. It was very simple from my perspective. It's all about trust. Without trust, you have nothing. If you don't have trust in the family unit, it's a terrible tragedy. And everyone has stories about their families, things breaking down. You look back on it, it's an absolute tragedy. We would never have won the America's Cup, regardless of the technology. Our boat was faster in 1970. Way back was Sir Frank Backer. It was quicker, but we weren't good enough. Part of it is we didn't work with each other enough.
Yeah.
Okay, we didn't have the trust in the organisation. Until we got that other element, that link in that chain, trust sorted, we were never going to win. And you look at the great efforts of the world. Generally, creativity comes from small SWAT teams, not from 1,000, design engineers or whatever. It comes from 4, 5, 6 people working together with wonderful trust environment. Trust comes from, very simple, in the way, I looked at the world and still do with the things I'm involved with. It comes from integrity. Okay, it's not rocket science. It comes from honesty, no bullshit. Okay, it comes from respect for each other. It comes from having fun, laughing. We've got to have fun, because if you're involved with something 7x24, okay, and you're not enjoying it, it's not going to happen. It'll be a 9 to 5. Okay.
Yeah.
So all the so-called failures, and I've been failed a lot more than I've ever won things. I look back at it, and invariably we've never got that so-called synergy organised, where you get 1 + 1 = 3 instead of 1 + 1 = 2.
It's kind of magic.
Yeah.
Plus, you've got to have the articulation of that, though, too, John. You have to be able.
You need to be able to present.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, like the Bob Hawke thing. And one thing that was important for me is I had to present as a leader. Okay. And that was part of my responsibility. I had to, if I had inhibitions, I had to, I used to get quite nervous when I was, younger. I remember my first real presentation was at Monash University in front of the Mech Eng, class. And I was so bloody nervous. What was I going to say? Blah, blah, blah. Well, things, you mature and you get older and more stupid. The other thing that I think is really, really important, particularly for anyone, but young people, and I keep hammering our grandchildren all the time, is curiosity. Okay, without curiosity, again, you have nothing. And the reality is, most people, when kids are growing up, we've got a 3-year-old granddaughter. She's just a gun. She says, "Pops, why is the sky blue? Okay, why can't we fly like a bird?" Legitimate questions. Okay, it's beautiful stuff. In other words, there's no restriction in their thinking. When they typically get to 12, 13, 14 years old, people stop asking questions, and they start talking about themselves. It's a beautiful thing to be able to talk about yourself all the time. And that's when people go into a flat line. And that's 80% of the world, maybe 90% of the world. People stop asking questions. I say to people, I'm a mature-aged gentleman now, all I know is I don't know. The whole world of AI, all the different things. You go into every new subject. I know so little, but I am curious and I'm constantly learning. Okay, someone like Benny Lexcen, he was a student of life. The great, as I say, the Leonardo da Vinci of this country, in my opinion. Okay, so curiosity within a team, and a creative team and whatever, which is where you boys are coming from, is just fundamental to any high performance organisation.
So if you apply that conversation let's come back to Brand Australia. Now you've been part of.
And what is Brand Australia?
Very good question.
Very good question. In my mind, a brand is a living, breathing, but non-tangible. It's a concept, if you like. But I've found it very useful to think about brands as people.
And what's Brand Australia then?
Richard, you have a perspective.
I think Brand Australia is really comes back to what our country was built upon. And I think necessity is the mother of invention. I think Australians, by character, are inventors and achieve things way beyond what was expected of them. I think we've got this, maybe it's a psychology that we're never quite good enough and we always have to prove ourselves and to be better. And I think that's why sport is a physical manifestation of that. It's a very simple thing for people to get around. Perhaps doing a degree or creating a piece of artwork or something is not quite as simple for them to see, it's simple to grasp. So I think in a way, Brand Australia is, as you said, Roy, it's the humanity that makes people Australian. And I think when people come to this country and actually live here, that they adopt that same attitude. That's what they like about Australia. It's still fresh.
Yeah,
it's interesting that we can talk about so many examples in so many industries, but sport always comes to the fore. Whatever we mean by Brand Australia, it might just be the awareness of Australia as a country and what we're all about, and let's call it our charisma. It happens infrequently, but there was in 2000 another event which most people under the age of 25 probably weren't around.
We're talking about the Olympic Games.
The Olympic Games.
Yeah.
So it was probably a bit like the America's Cup. There was Australia. And I still can remember, because we emigrated just before that, and seeing that footage when they announced that Sydney had won.
Across the line, they make a final move.
Just talk a little bit, and maybe Richard, I'd love you to come in maybe towards the tail end, because you were brought into that whole exercise and you did some of your most memorable work at the time. But what was your involvement in Olympics 2000 in Sydney?
Well, I was co-founder of a company called Quokka Sports, and we took that to Silicon Valley, launched it on NASDAQ. It was in partnership with NBC in America, broadcasting. That we did that first of all, I was involved with a project called One Australia, America's Cup Challenge, 1995. That boat broke up and sank in 90 seconds off San Diego in the Pacific Ocean. It was the biggest thing on the internet other than the moon landing. The boat breaking up, and sinking, America's Cup. And my technology partner, a guy called Alan Ramberton, he was doing a short course at Stanford University at the time. We're talking about March 1995, and he said, "John, we've got to get into this thing called the internet." And I said, "What's the internet?" We're talking about a long time ago. Dial-up, right? Beep, beep, beep. And he tried to get shares in a company called Netscape, which just changed the game, the first browser that was invented. And anyway, so one thing led to another. We built a company. We took it from Melbourne. We figured the only way we're going to be serious about this is either go to London, New York, or San Francisco. We decided San Francisco. Slept on some mattresses while we're there raising money. 120 million US we raised, Built this company, 500 people in San Francisco. Then we basically produced the biggest website visitation in the world at the time during the 2000 Olympics. It was called NBCOlympics.com, right?
This is 5 years after the internet really was born.
Yeah. And and we're still dial-up, compared to broadband now. So the game has changed so dramatically. But we had 350 people in Homebush broadcasting NBCOlympic.com. Within a year, we figured we could have done the same broadcast with 35 people instead of 350. Technology changing because we're cut and pasting. This world here that you boys have got, all the electronics, they'll be doing it remotely soon, I guess, whatever. But anyway, the point is I was there, and in addition to that, I was a mentor with Herb Elliott and Dawn Fraser for the Olympic team. So I stayed as an Olympic, an assistant, not an assistant. I was a liaison person with Herb and Dawn Fraser. And for the young people who have never heard of Dawn Fraser and Herb Elliott, they're two of the greatest Olympians that our country's ever produced. Anyway, so I was assigned to sailing and track and field and spent a little time with Kathy Freeman and whatever. Just not talking to them about how they run fast or leap higher, but to face their fears on the world stage, because I'd been there and done that. So my involvement with the Olympics was quite deep, as it turns out, and it was very memorable. Big deal. Great for Australia, this whole thing. The 2000 Olympics. Let me say, I think Brand Australia is about the can-do attitude that we have, okay? I think it's very simple. You know, having spent 4 years in Silicon Valley and with the Americans, probably the best takeaway there is fail fast, learn, succeed. Fail fast, learn, succeed, all right? And I think, that's pretty interesting. You're never back against the Yanks. They're highly educated on the average. Their can-do attitude is just enormous. Well, Australia? Well, it's this can-do attitude as well. Get shit done in many ways. And I see that as part of the reason, 27 million people, what we achieved, not only in the sporting world, but in business and technology, is quite amazing. The only other country that's similar to that is New Zealand. I just love what they achieve with so little people.
And they're
yeah.
1/10 of the size.
Amazing, yeah.
They did punch above their weight.
But let me say that my impression, spending a reasonable chunk of time during the Olympics, was how friendly Australians, okay, the volunteers that came from all around the country. It was really the first time that the volunteer army was actually instituted, okay, and they did it pretty well, and that's been a benchmark for future Olympics beyond that. So it's the warmth of the volunteers that was just struck me, and the quality. Talking to these different characters, volunteers from all around the country, it was heart-rending stuff. And us Aussies, when we travel overseas, we're seen as naive in many ways, because we're less sophisticated perhaps than the Europeans, or less in your face than the Americans, okay? We have a different way of things, but we have this quirky sense of humour, I think, and we have a sense of sincerity on the average that's pretty compelling as international, people. And it's this whole issue of the friendliness. We've got our 18-year-old granddaughter's just come in from London, where she's grown up with her mum and dad, and she's staying with us for 3 months. She's blown away by how friendly the natives are.
I think
it's a beautiful thing.
I think on that, if I could just speak about the Olympics and the brand, you have to remember in those days, and you remember this, John, that the Olympics came to Australia pretty tarnished because Atlanta had a lot of sponsorship problems. There was a bit of political issues with the chairman. And when we always saw the Olympics in Australia as repairing, as repolishing the car, refitting it, and then sending it back to the world. And from our point of view, our brief was to represent the athletes' games, because they took the emphasis away from sponsorship and big business, etc., back into the athletes, which you mentioned before, Kathy Friedman, etc. So that concept that you said of friendly was to create the Australian persona in a way that the world reflected upon, as opposed to how Australia saw themselves. So it was very much a global focus.
Right.
And thinking about your journey of coming back and winning the America's Cup, etc., we had the same thing. We're a small firm. We won the opportunity to do the brand through a competition. We worked on it for 7 years. We won it before the Atlanta. I went to Atlanta Games and had a look at that. We then developed the identity and really took the identity and took what brand was all about. We brought brand to the Olympics, which is similar to what you're talking about, and taking brand to a yacht race. It actually became indivisible, and it was the most exciting time. And I think going back to your comment about the Olympics and raising up the level, you don't. It's been often said, going to the Olympic arena, you actually do raise your own level of ability, because you're just in this incredible performance arena.
So just
let me just also throw in a little one here. For the America's Cup, Australia too, we created our own brand. It was called the Boxing Kangaroo flag.
Yeah,
symbology.
Yeah.
And that was different. That was an aggressive brand to take on the United States of America. The event had never been won by any nation for 130 years. So it was a brief. It was evolved, but ultimately, red gloves for aggression. Red is aggressive colour. Pumped up chest for the pride of the nation to take on the world. And whenever we left the dock and came back, we always flew our battle flag. So it's a different type of brand to brand Australia, I think, although...
Well, it's a part of it, isn't it?
Well, it really is, because the Australian Olympic Committee now own the brand. I think the Bond Corporation, Alan Bond, sold it for $100 to the AOC. Why? He wanted a custodian of something that was very important for us, And so when our Olympians go to battle, the Boxing Kangaroo flag's all part of who they are.
But also, John, it's something that everyone can understand. There's a lot of design out there and brands out there that are sort of geometric solutions that don't have an emotional connection. It has an emotional connection, and then the individual looking at that can read their own story into it.
But it's very, very simple and clear too. I mean, you don't have to be, you don't have to be Einstein to figure out what that boxing kangaroo represented. It was pretty overt.
When we studied armies over the last 1,000 years, okay, we typically, as humans, we go to war with symbols, music and symbols. Okay, so we created our battle flag, the Boxing Kangaroo flag, and our battle hymn was Men at Work Down Under. The Vegemite sandwich thing, and it was just synonymous with winning, and it still is, as turns out. We go particularly internationally. You hear you see the flag being waved, and invariably the music's popping up.
But that same way of articulation was what they did with the Sydney 2000 Olympic brand mark. It was actually the running athlete made up of boomerang shapes and the opera house, etc. But the mind. People's minds actually then convey their own story. That's the power, and I think that's the way it was so effective. You did it in a very, very bold, very simple understanding. We probably did it slightly more complicated, but the outcome was that people felt they had ownership.
What are the one or two things, if you could really target that audience? There's somebody out there that's just started a company or owns a company already and is thinking about their brand and trying to make it more successful by means of brand. What are one or two pointers, if they were listening to that now, what would you suggest they could act on?
Well, it's a deep question, but I think an overview. First of all, youth, beautiful thing, no fear. Okay, don't worry about jumping off. Just swim as hard as you can, son or daughter. And failure. In America, having lived in Silicon Valley and worked with the Americans over, we lived in the US for about 10 years, my wife and I, different times, different places. Typical startups, it's really on the average, you fail twice before you actually get it sorted, right? So when we're building Quokka Sports, and we had with venture capitalists on our board, they say, John, make sure that you employ people who have failed as well as ones who have been successful, because the failures, they bring experience to the team. Okay, so don't be afraid of failure. But I think the most important thing is to remain curious, regardless of your age. Younger people, by definition, are more curious. Although I am concerned about people just talking about themselves. How boring is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, generally, entrepreneurs, you have to say, are curious because they're creating, and they have a lot of ideas over the horizon, stuff that is a part of the imagination and becomes real, and that's all about curiosity, searching, and also a set of values building about trust and the things that emanate from trust, integrity, honesty, transparency.
There's many brands around don't deliver that today.
Yeah,
I think there's that inbuilt suspicion. In fact, the younger audience would know exactly when to be suspicious. They've been exposed to so much. So how do you build that trust into a brand?
Well, you can't bullshit the audience for too long. Okay, and I just think that women in particular have got a great sense of understanding what's real and what's not. I meet someone and it'd take me maybe a week or a month to find out that he or she's not quite the person I figured. My wife, Raza, boom, within milliseconds, it's all figured out. Their ability to process, their brain's different. That's why diversity is so damn important. Bring these ideas to the table, for God's sake. Why we, at the exclusion of these grey old men making major decisions. It's just crazy. But I think this whole issue of building an organisation with great integrity, okay, people want to work for that, particularly the new generation where, why are we doing this, as well as making money.
It's about walking the talk too, because it's very easy to have a sheen of what's going on and having a perception, But when that becomes reality, that is the critical thing. It's narrowing that gap between uncertainty and belief, which I think has probably characterised your whole career and in your sporting achievements as well, John.
Well, when you've got to get up and stand in front of a whole bunch of people, they'll see through you pretty fast if you don't have the right stuff in many ways. Yeah.
I just have one final question relating to Olympics and branding, and then Richard, you have your famous closing question, which you're going to give to John. I've just been throwing this around in my mind, and Richard and I have had a conversation about 2032, because if you break it down into component brand strategies, you've got the Olympics brand. The Olympic brand is thousands of years old in terms of its origins. You have the Australian brand being the country, and then we've got a city called Brisbane.
Yep.
Now, so in a way, there's a 3-tier brand conversation. Sydney had no issue because Sydney was world famous, probably through many particular
the
reasons.
Opera
the
House
Opera House was probably the icon. So if you went around the world and said, "Have you heard of Sydney?" One of the challenges might be for Australia and the Olympic movement, particularly, and Brisbane and Queensland, I guess, is how many people in the world have heard of Brisbane right now?
Mm-hmm.
So what's your sort of observation about how important it is to balance those, the Olympic brand, the country brand, and the city that hosts it? Is there an important sort of dynamic there?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? When you look at the Olympic locations in the past, well, first of all, the model that was endeavouring to be evolved is move the Olympics out from one particular city, spread it around, because the cost was crazy, and they're trying to make it a practical, even though the numbers are still off the planet. You're right. Sydney had Harbour Bridge, Opera House, symbolic.
Yep.
LA next time, 2028. Los Angeles, Hollywood.
Yep.
They'll do that. That'll be a technology-driven imaging from my perspective.
Yep.
This whole gaming is bigger than Hollywood combined.
Which the brand even is like that, because
so they'll very much they'll celebrate the technology of and social media technology and so on. The Hollywood in terms of television and film pales into insignificance compared to online. The new world, okay?
Yeah.
So that'll be 2028. So you're right. So 2032, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Is this Manana land? No. In other words, Brisbane, Queensland. Is this, sunbaking? Well, I'm not sure. I'm sure it'll all be part of the thing. But you're right. It'll be creating something that will be quite, has to be, does it have to be fresh? Well, building again, this country is built by people, entrepreneurs, immigrants. Yeah, so I don't know. I haven't, it's outside my area of thought at the moment. But I think it gets back to perhaps the brand values of who we are as a nation and what we're proud of. And in addition to that, zeroing in more to the geographic location of Brisbane and Queensland, heat, warmth, whatever, and freedom.
And opportunity.
And opportunity, yep. Again, what this country has done, well, obviously thousands of years with our Aboriginal Indigenous culture, and then with the modern generation coming, it's been extraordinary. And we have a democratic environment. We don't shoot bullets at each other. We actually talk on who barracks for which football teams, whether it's NRL or AFL or cricket or whatever.
Sport again.
Sport. You're right. So sport's a key driver here. And, of course, the Olympics is all about sport. And we pride ourselves in so-called batting above our weight regarding our sporting ability globally.
I think also it's about representing a culture and humanity. Sport is all about human endeavour. And I think the combination, what might happen is that the technology maybe falls away for more of what you can do as a nation, as a race of people, as a contribution to the globe. I think that is probably a way of inverting the triangle from an unknown to a known, because you get all this media publicity. But the way the brand's expressed has got to convey some of those messages, which, as you say, John, are yet to be determined.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things, we're friendly people. We're a friendly tribe.
So this might be the People's Olympics.
There you go.
Richard,
Right.
please,
Okay.
your $64 million question.
I like to always think about this, John, when someone has been through a huge amount of experience. What would you whisper into the ear of your younger self now that you're looking back to what you've achieved, and what would be helpful for a younger person to learn or take away from this interview we've had with you?
Well, I guess it's revolving around this whole concept of being curious. Seek out mentors. Very rarely people say no. If someone, an interesting person, approaches someone else, say, I'd like to seek your knowledge, invariably they'll say yes. Okay? So when I look back on it, I've had very, very important people guiding me, but looking back on it, I could have done better in seeking out even more people, and particularly people with expertise in these different areas. I could have done better in that regard. Gotten involved in property development, made a lot of money, lost a lot of money, made a little bit back, but roller coaster stuff. Looking back on it, there's been many, many very interesting people in hindsight meeting since, where I thought, gee, I wished I had, I could have maybe leveraged off that knowledge base. A very good friend of mine said, after we came out of this, when I retired from international yacht racing, John, walk and talk. Okay, find out what other people are doing. So that's really revolving around this concept of being, or not conscious, but a thought, instruction for young people to be curious, ask questions, seek knowledge. Very simple.
Well, I think our mission for BRANDR has been more than delivered. It's all about what has brand got to do with success. So I don't think there would be anybody that would argue that you are not a great example of success in so many different ways. You've used brand, you've been associated with brand, and I think the learnings for the audience today, they're things to take away and think about. And if nothing else, the team of Australians that have got the job in 7 years from now to get us back on the world stage should be thinking about what they've heard today. So just want to thank you very much, John, for your time. It's been very fascinating to meet a legend.
Pleasure.
And to actually meet somebody that was there at these various key moments in history. And I hope that we're all there sitting there in our seat in Brisbane for the opening ceremony.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, John.